Hi, I am Michel Ferreira, and this is a special edition of my podcast, Bias Not Biased. For this edition, we hosted a fire session with the group from Echoes Design Leadership. Echoes is a thinking school that runs a design leadership course, and their third season is happening right now, starting in October. I'm very happy to be part of their leadership group for this season. And for the fire sessions, we had Diego Pulido and Koji Pereira invited for this one. But for the leadership course itself, you get to experience talking and listening to Bruce Mao and Stephen Gates and Leslie Ann and many, many other amazing design leaders. So I'm gonna let you go watch the fire session about design leadership. Hope you enjoy it and talk to you soon. Oh, thanks a lot, Erico. And yeah, it's my third season with the Design Leadership Group. I'm very excited to have Diego here and Koji. Guys, I would love to start by hearing just a little bit of your background for people who haven't met you. I think I've met both of you either on Clubhouse or on Twitter. So I would just like to have a little bit of like an intro for everyone else. But before I pass the ball, I'm Michel. I've been doing design for about 20 years. I'm originally from Brazil. We are the group for Latin America here. We're representing Latin America. We have a person from Brazil, also Koji. We have Diego from Colombia. So Diego, why don't you take it away and start introducing yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Michel. My name is Diego Pulido. I'm from Bogota, Colombia. I currently live in New York and currently work at Google. And fun fact, Michel and I actually met on Clubhouse of all things, but we actually managed to meet in person, probably in person in Sydney earlier in the year. So this is not just an internet relationship of sorts. So that's a really, really fun fact. I've also been doing design for a little over 12 years now. Worked in fintech, in education technology, in cloud, and e-commerce, and now at Google.
And we're going to pass the ball to Koji, who also worked at Google before. So I thought it was a funny little tidbit to have both that have worked in Google on the same day. Koji.
All right. Well, thanks for inviting me for this chat, Michel. And well, my name is Koji. I'm originally from Belo Horizonte in Brazil. Moved to US 9 years ago. Worked on few companies, including Google, Lyft, and now Neon, and Twitter, of course. And yeah, I think that's pretty much like short story.
Sounds great. Thank you. Well, so I have some questions that we've collected already that we're going to go to start the fire session, and then we're going to get questions from the group. The first question I have for both of you, and I'm not even sure, Erico, if I should join in at that, but we'll figure it out. The first question is, how did you start in design? So, I would love to hear your background. How did you start? What actually got you into design? First takers, let's go inverted now. Koji, you start.
Okay, I can start. Oh, that's a long story. Let's see. I think I always...
We have time, Koji. We have time.
Yeah. How much time do we have, by the way? Is it like an hour?
I think we have an hour.
Okay. So I started with graphic design. And the reason why I started with graphic design, I think I always had this like interest on arts and also in technology, and it was almost like things in parallel in my life. And I was very good at math, but I wasn't like trying to improve my skills on math because I wanted to have a band and I wanted to play, and so I was trying to push my artistic side more. And at some point, I think in 1997, the internet was becoming a thing in Brazil, and I decided to build a website for my band. And then I started to build websites for other bands too. And at some point that just became my profession. And I had my first job in a digital agency / startup in the year 2000. I say / startup because we had two products, but we also had clients. And at some point, I joined Google in 2008 to work on Orkut. That was pretty much my second job in the field, and I never stopped. So basically, started with graphic design, doing posters for bands, doing covers for albums, and then end up doing websites end up doing product design later.
That's really cool. Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Koji. And that's all in Brazil, right? All starting in Belo Horizonte.
Most of it, the first part, yes. And then like when I joined Google, I worked for Google 3 years in Brazil, and then I moved to US. And in total, I worked for Google for almost 10 years. So went to some transitions there, work in different teams. I think I always looked up for smaller teams that are building something from scratch rather than like teams that are kind of, working in a bigger environment. But I was able to work in some big products too, like YouTube, and I think Google News was kind of medium size. But I always like to, build something from scratch, work in a smaller environment. So I think that's pretty much it. That's the story.
Nice. Thank you. Funny enough, I also started from graphic design and ended up doing design because of bands and music, which is, I thought, an interesting
I remember we talked about it.
connection. Yeah, I've always had this fun connection with when I talk to you on podcasts, when I talk to all of the designers, I find these threads, and it really makes me think about like how, sometimes the creative side that wants to come out finds an outlet in design, right? Diego, how did you start in design?
Well, I also have a connection with music. However, not this is not how I got through design. I just happen to like to play, and that's really it. But the journey is a little different on my end. I moved to UNR, University of Nevada, Reno, in Nevada for college, and I arguably one of the best journalism schools in the U.S. And that's what I decided to do, journalism. I decided that it was not going to be more of a global career, so I wanted to go with the science because I wanted to just maybe go back to Colombia, live around the world. I didn't know. So what I did is that I switched to psychology as my major. And I did that because I was reading psychology books like they were basically magazines. And I thought, wow, human behavior is really, really interesting. And I just wanted to know more. But I wasn't quite sure if I was going to be a neuroscientist or a, strict clinical cognitive psychologist kind of thing. So right towards the end, I took a class in computers, but it was under the psychology department. And that is perhaps one of the turning points in my career towards design, which is it was just simply called computers in psychology. It was if any of you remember, Visual Basic.net programming class. And it was just done so we could create our own experiments or perception experimental psychology experiments like color perception, facial perception, stuff like that. And that's when I realized that I really was passionate about technology. However, I wasn't really sure if I was going to be making the cut for making it as a computer science major. So I remember taking one computer science class going like, definitely not a left brain kind of person. So I quickly scaled back from that. And it was towards the end of my career in my undergrad studies in psychology that I found the field that was yet another turning point in my career towards design, which was the field of human computer interaction, or commonly known as HCI. That is when I discovered that it was composed mainly of two main elements: computer science world and psychology world. So I thought it was just a great entry to the world of psychology that could use my my understanding of human behavioral studies while still working with people who came from the other side of the world, which was the one from computer science. So after discovering that world, I wasn't really sure where to get such an education of sorts. That's when I discovered that Indiana University, I knew about Carnegie Mellon, I knew about other very well-known entities, but in Indiana University, they were teaching a master's in human-computer interaction. And that's really where I got exposed and just shown everything about the world of user experience design. And it was, in fact, in one of these classes that someone pulled out a job post for Pearson Education, which is if anybody has owned a textbook in their lives, it's either McGraw-Hill or Pearson. So Pearson was based out of Indianapolis, which is where I used to live at the time. And that's where I got my first job as an interaction designer. And then that's when I really started this journey of design. And fast forward a couple of years later to being in an agency, working at Dell in Austin, Texas, working at a cloud company called Rackspace, then working at JP Morgan Chase for a number of years, having a short stint at Adobe in California, and then finally Google almost 2 years ago. And voila, here we are.
And here we are. Good. That's look at that. That's such a beautiful story wrapped up in all these there's all these things that look like coincidence too. It's like, well, I met this thing where I saw this class where I'm reading this book, and then all of a sudden I'm like into this. Um, my start very very similarly to yours. I was doing college for marketing and advertising, which again, it's not really design, has nothing to do with design per se. But I was making websites for myself and for my friends and for people. And one of my teachers saw me doing it. And he was like, "Hey, do you want to go work in my agency doing this?" And I'm like, "I can work doing this? Like, this is a thing?" Because it was also back in, I think, 97, Koji, like you. So there was not like the internet that we live in today, right? That didn't exist. There was no Google. Yahoo was the biggest search. And so having someone tell you that you can come in and join a company and do these designs, it was very surprising to me. There was no course for this in Brazil. There was no Echoes doing design leadership for anyone like this. So I thought that it's interesting to see these connections, and how to see how all of us ended up here. Although I haven't ended up in Google like you guys. I worked at Booking.com in the Netherlands, moved to Canada to work for Shopify, and now I'm here at Atlassian. Which leads us to our second question. How did you guys become design leaders, right? How did your career progress from the graphic design days all of a sudden to being a senior interaction designer in a company as recognized as Google, or Koji, a chief design officer at Neon, right? The last time we talked, you weren't a chief design officer at Neon. We're gonna park that one. We're gonna go to Diego first, making sure we're doing the loop around. So Diego, how did you land Google as a senior interaction designer?
My story with Google is very interesting because it involved close to 9 years and 3 full attempts. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to people who have tried to join a company of this size, perhaps being told no more than once, which I later came to find out from one of the recruiters as I was getting an offer after nearly a decade, that it is actually quite common not to get in the first round. So a company of this size, I think for a lot of designers could perhaps, or people in technology can relate to wanting to belong to some of these big monolithic entities, commonly known as FANG, if anybody has heard that much at the time: Facebook, Apple, Google. I forget what the N was, but in any case,
Netflix.
It was it. Okay, there you go, Netflix. Always as somewhat of a goal to have in mind, but generally speaking, some of these places are extremely selective, as they should, because they're creating the very best products out there. So to me, it was just a constant intense attempt to try and belong to some of these places. I cannot imagine how many times I've interviewed to jobs that I thought were completely unreachable, and for the most part they were. But as the years went on, I think you also grow in your field and you grow in your practice and you learn more things. You get exposed to really, really important moments in time in your career, and the place where that happens, it's almost irrelevant. The important thing is at that point is that you're having some level of experience. Then you dabble perhaps a little bit into management, like I did at JP Morgan Chase, and then you learn some things there, or you get exposed to very, very difficult projects with very big visibility. But it is perhaps at a cloud company, and it's not exactly all this place. All of these kind of forming moments, like they stick with you in your career. And if you leverage the experience and the momentum of those, eventually you have something to share when the time is right, and when the moment comes that a company like this may look over your portfolio, look what you've done, you can talk about it freely. So every time that I was denied an opportunity, or you was told, no, sorry, this is not going to be, of course, the first thing I thought is, I'm obviously not good enough. This is just never going to happen. Although I will say that after the third attempt at Google, I thought, like, this is not it. Then it was never in the cards for me to be like that. But perseverance, it's very important, and also trying to really understand that everything that you've learned, whether you think is big or small, is all part of that background knowledge that you ultimately need to really do great things at great places. And I personally think that I still have a ton to achieve in my career and my professional journey as a designer. But I would say that joining Google was one of those moments where, like, you really feel like all of that previous work really pays off, and it's a moment that anybody should, number one, feel proud of, but second, if you're in that journey of, oh, I tried to get this one job. It doesn't have to be at the FANG companies or anything, but if you're trying to get this one role, this one company, it's a dream and it's a no, and it doesn't happen, that is nothing but fuel for trying once again stronger and better next time. So that's what I take from my experience getting here.
100%. And I remember an anecdote though that you told me when you were walking around New York and you showed your mom the building. Was that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I had just moved to New York. This is back in 2015, and my lovely Colombian mother making sure that my apartment and my building. By the way, that's one of her paintings that you see here in the background. So yeah, she basically just comes to make sure that my apartment has her artwork very well displayed. Now the world is seeing it, obviously. So and I was just kind of walking her around, and there's a part in New York City called Chelsea Market, which is where the Google offices really are in New York. And when you're in Chelsea Market, full of shops, mostly restaurants, it's just very, very touristy area on the west side of Manhattan. I remember just walking around. I was very happy and excited to join JP Morgan Chase for a number of different reasons, working in mobile payments and fintech and all that. But I remember just, I mean, going outside of the Chelsea Market entrance, there's a massive sign right in front of you that says Google. And I just remember just telling my mom and like kind of pointed and I said, algún día, ma, algún día. She just basically says just like one day. I mean, and of course, you know, mom's being mom's like, yeah, of course, yes, of course it's gonna happen. I'm just like, no, you have no, you have no idea how many times I've tried, but it's okay. It's yeah, but I just said, hey, like one day. I just pointed it and so walking in front of that particular part of Manhattan House now has a special meaning to me from that anecdote.
Yep. I can see the emotion too, and that's why I love that story. I see there's the perseverance and there's the emotional side of like this is the goal, right? I want to achieve it. Koji, I'm not sure how many Google offices you visited. I know Diego visits all of them all over the world. You were in Google in the US. You moved to other companies, but again, you're now Chief Design Officer, which is it's actually quite new title. In the design world, but it's not a thing that has existed for a long time. CEOs, CTOs exist, but CDOs are new. So how did you get to here? What do you think of this role? What can you share of your story?
Awesome. Well, first of all, thanks, Diego, for sharing your story. It's a beautiful story. And, as a Latino, I feel like similar stories with my mom, bringing her to US, showing her things and getting her excited. It makes me very proud. So to me, I think the beauty of design to me is that you can really first like go to many directions. Like there's so many things you can do as a designer. You can do product design, yes, but you can do graphic design, you can do physical products, you can do hardware, you can do VR, you can do AR, whatever you want to do. So that's the first thing, like just make sure that you learn all the different umbrellas and specialties of design. And then there's a second layer to it, which is leadership. And leadership to me, I think the idea of leader could feel like a role, but it's not a role to me. It's more like a characteristic. And you can be a leader in very different roles. As an example, now in design is becoming very clear that you can follow the path of becoming a leader of people, or basically managing people, or you can just be a technical leader, someone who does a very good craft and design, and you can evolve as an individual contributor in that side. And I think it wasn't clear when I decided to become a manager, I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago or so. And to me, it was a little bit of like, okay, if I want to evolve as a designer, that's the only path I can follow. But fortunately enough, it was something that I liked, because I used to organize events. I used to, be in like NGOs and put people together. I was a teacher back in Brazil. So for me, like getting people and communicating with a lot of people, influencing people, and facilitating conversations was something that I was excited about. And I was actually planning to go back to university and teach again when I talked with my manager at Google, and she said like, well, maybe you want to try to be a manager and see how it goes, like maybe start with 1 or 2 people. You're gonna have some of the feelings that you like as a teacher, like for instance, having a connection with someone who come back to you like after 3-4 years and say like, oh, that specific day really changed my mind, thanks for teaching that in that sense, or opening my eyes about that specific problem that I could solve. But she also said like that will be maybe like 1% of your day, and the rest will be a lot of problems that you have to solve and a lot of meetings. And I tried out. I kind of like it for some reason, because I could not like it. There's so many reasons to not like managing people. But now there's like this whole thing on being IC. And I remember when I was at Google, I only met maybe like a senior staff designer at that moment, which is 2 levels after senior. But now you can find like principal designers, distinguished designers in many, many companies, including Google, which to me kind of opens up a new umbrella, a new whole option to become a leader and evolve as an IC without necessarily moving on to management, which is something that I'm actually trying to replicate at Neon right now. I'm trying to hire a principal designer for maybe 3 months, and I kind of discovered that maybe there's 3 or 4 in Brazil. So I'm kind of opening up to other countries. So if anyone is interested or knows somebody who wants to, be a principal designer, reach me out. But basically the idea here there is that you can evolve as an IC, as a maker, someone who actually, in this case, for instance, is basically being out a vision for the company within like 10 years, 5 years, 2 years, working with all the executives to kind of like pitching out that idea, connecting the dots between different teams. It's a lot of work, but it's an IC work. It's not like managing people, organizing a team, or shaping an org like I have to do every day. And it's a very interesting field, and it's very interesting that design can actually have many spaces for leadership. I think for me personally, I think I told a little bit of the story, but I like the idea, and I always like the idea of shaping the culture, shaping the organization, promoting the design inside a company. And also like when you get to more like CDO or VP level, I believe like it's not just about design anymore. So you actually have to understand product, you have to understand business, and kind of help the other VPs also figure out and navigate how they connect their other organizations to your organization. It's pretty tough, to be honest, but it's a very challenging and opening mind process for me, because I feel like I never really had to think so much cross-functional as I have to think right now.
No, that was great share, Coach. Thank you. And I love the whole separating there are design leaders that are focusing on the people, and there are design leaders that are focusing on the craft, and actually allowing that space to grow and allowing this separation. I took management last year at Atlassian. I know Diego took management there at JP Morgan. I came back to craft. I saw that there was a need in the leadership space in the group that I'm in to keep pushing the craft side and to keep evolving that. And I felt like the people are taking cover. Like they're well covered. They have people taking care of them. But it's good to see like when you were evolving, that you can find your spaces and can go like, hey, maybe I do need to step into the people side, and that's where I can put more effort, or I find myself doing the things that I like more every day, instead of just doing it because because you thought that the title, like we have new craft titles, like you said, staff, senior staff. I still have a hard time saying staff designer. I think you're gonna design a staff for Gandalf. Diego wanted to chime in.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a really just it's very interesting to see Koji's experience and journey into what could be considered management. Also, because if I remember back when I did do a stint on managing at JP Morgan Chase, it also had to do a lot with the culture of the company. So, for example, some companies don't have a way to quote unquote move up unless it's management, and then there are other places that clearly maybe because they have DNA, like tech DNA, which is what I like to say, like tech companies, they do allow for that IC role to move up and evolve in your career, grow in your career, and have that level of influence, that level of leadership without having to manage. And I think it's also something that addresses um, something that is very near and dear to everybody else personally, which is some people are naturally meant to be managers in terms of dealing with other people, understanding coaching, and others are excelling in other ways, and maybe that might not be the route. And knowing that at this point in this world of design, that is a possibility that not too long ago really wasn't in most places. And the fact that people are realizing this and companies are realizing this, it really just opens up the possibilities to really excel and do what feels best to you as a practitioner and also as a person. And also the fact that you may be able to go back and forth, like Michel just said, like go into managing, go into IC, and just having that freedom is just absolutely unique. And I think that only a few years ago, that really wasn't possible in our field. So a perfect time to really consider that in design.
100%. We used to say back at Shopify, we used to say a career is not a ladder, it's a jungle gym. So you can jump around and experiment. It's really hard because not all the companies believe that, right? So it's good to have the privilege and accept that you have that privilege, that in these companies, you are allowed to jump around. You're allowed to try things and test things. We actually had a designer in our group decide that she wanted to try being a product manager instead of a designer. So we found a role for her. It's all about finding the roles. And that's part of what I think you were describing, Koji. You are also helping people find their roles by being that person, right? You can help them figure out if this is the right place for them. I love that you're pitching people to apply to your job. If anyone wants to follow these guys on Twitter, it's IX Diego for Diego Pulido, and Koji Eu Mesmo for Koji. We can type them later on the chat. So if you want to apply for Koji's job position there, you never know.
Great Twitter last name, by the way.
It's really good.
Mismo?
It's really good. Koji mesmo. So I'm gonna jump to something a little more broad on the next question. I wanted to take this one a little bit more like open, like in your minds, a little abstract. Where do you see design going next? It can be design leadership. It can be design as, interaction design. It can be design as an industry or a craft. Koji, it can be what you were talking about, like opening up the different roles. So let's go to you. Where do you see design going next?
I think there is two spaces that I see design going next. One is more on the, technical side, and the futuristic side, which I know a lot of people love. And then the other side is more in the soft skill sides, or more like leadership or influence side. So I'll start with the technology side. To me, there's a very clear opportunity for design to evolve beyond just like surface, beyond just 2D, and beyond one device, right? Like, so right now you're gonna see more and more product designers working in cars cockpits, or working on TVs, working on VR, working on AR, or even audio, as how to call it, audio design or something else.
Yep.
Yes.
Audio and voice design, right?
Voice and audio design. I think it's going to be like a huge expansion of possibilities beyond just the regular 2D device or phone or desktop. And it's just going to be hard, because I remember like I made bad bets in the past. For instance, when Second Life was becoming a thing, I kind of invested some time kind of learning and studying Second Life a little bit, and then end up being a disaster, right? Like it didn't end up in anywhere. Some of those things might just be another Second Life. Others maybe could stick. And when they stick, it will be like a big shift. And it was pretty much like that when iPhone was launched. A lot of people were like, oh yeah, that's another phone, but we already have keyboards. Keyboards are easier to type, or nobody's gonna buy something in their phones. They prefer security of using a desktop to buy something on the e-commerce. That's a kind of craziness that will pass through our minds in the past, right? Like, and we didn't believe when Apple removed the headphone jack from it. Now all the phones don't have it, although I know you guys like the wired headphones. But anyways, there's a lot of things that it's going to be a bet, and maybe some of the things will stick. Maybe Web3 will become a thing, and particularly I really believe in Web3, but there are so many possibilities, right? In technology side, there's many ways where a designer can kind of like dig deep on that, maybe learning 3D, learning modeling, or learning how to do how to work with ML, how to work with AI, how to work with even crypto, or there's so many things in the technology side. And then on the other side, to me, is like all this people skills. Like, how do you grow as a designer in a sense of, it's not necessarily technology, but more about like, how do you positively influence people? How do you positively influence a company to be more design centric, or to think more about their users, to be more people centric? There's so many, aspects of this. There's the whole product inclusion and diversity side of things. There is the cut on accessibility. There is a cut on how do you actually make decisions internally? How do you think about your processes? How do you make decisions based on data or based on user research? How do you implement new ways to distribute research internally and make people closer to their users? So there's a whole space and area to explore on this, like internal influence, or how to make your company more people centric. So those to me are the two areas where designers will grow and will make more impact in the future.
Nice. Yeah, well, thank you for that one, Koji. I love that, again, all directions. This was a very broad one. So Diego, where do you see design going next?
Koji touched on a lot of things that I see happening as well, but more specifically, I think that I like to think back when Steve Jobs pulls out the iPhone from his pants. He's like, a 3-in-1 kind of thing. I'm just thinking that's the future. Like back then, I remember that Windows Mobile 6.5 was out, and it was kind of like, and I was just like, no, I thought that was the future. And then like, how is this going to be the future? I somehow was convinced that my career, therefore life, was going to change the moment the iPhone got released in 2007. And much to what Koji was saying earlier too, is like, is this going to really work? We already have phones with keyboards. Well, a lot of it I remember was about the iPhone being a nice gadget, a nice toy, but it's not a real like powerful machine kind of thing. And me thinking, I want to turn my career into this. So I think there's that moment in time where I knew that design was and overall the world of technology was going to really evolve into all of us like really having this as our main computer. And to bring my lovely mother back into the conversation, I remember thinking, well, she cannot switch on a computer, but she can write an email on an iPhone. And she, so thinking, oh wow, this is really empowering. And I think there's something about empowering aspects of it where I see a little bit of Web3 really coming into place, and I'll touch on that in a sec. But personally, I think that the same way that perhaps a lot of people saw the iPhone or smartphones as a nice to have, nice toy, nice thing, but not really all that serious. Like you couldn't really possibly build a business out of an app, right? And fast forward to what we have right now, I see some of that happen in the world of mixed reality, but more specifically, augmented reality. I'm not really entirely sure. I will not try and bet what's going to happen in virtual reality. But with augmented reality, what's fascinating is that we already have very, very capable augmented reality devices in our hands with LiDAR, like scanners, and that is just our phones. Like that's it. So the mobile phone, what we thought was once a toy before or nice to have, is also our entry point. I know that there's glasses coming, there's all this like maybe even contact lenses, who knows? But at this point in time, we have very capable AR devices with us, and I think that the mobile phone is a device that serves as a really nice bridge into that world. And that allows us to think, wait, maybe I should dabble into 3D modeling. Maybe I should dabble into maybe playing with Unity or Unreal Engine or stuff like that, because these are the technologies right now that will empower some of those experiences. And that is part of where I also see design going, in the sense that it's a practice where you're always learning and you're always having to catch up with what's next, what's the new technology, what's the new language, what's the new even piece of software that you need to use. So that will continue to happen. And especially now when you include something like 3D modeling and such for something like AR, I see a lot of that just taking more center stage, and maybe people thinking, this is more than just a toy or a game that you can play with AR. Maybe this is something that could really enhance an experience that, in the same way that perhaps a map on your phone was able to do at that point. So there is that aspect of that. And of course, as of already a couple of years from now until now, there's this whole aspect of Web3 that it's, like I said earlier, very empowering to the user, very, trying to get a sense of really owning that part of technology that in the past has belonged to other corporations or other companies and such. And I think there's something to be said there in terms of where is the role of design and it fit, or how does it fit in the world of Web3. That's very interesting. I think I have seen sprouts here and there of designers moving into that field. It's a little bit nebulous to me, but that's something I'm also very, very interested in, because it is definitely where a lot of the world of technology is really going. So I think that trying to understand that world, trying to utilize the technology, really get acquainted with it, and trying to see where this very creative space that we are very lucky to revolve around each and every single day, how does it fit in that world of technology? I think that's something that anyone in this field is going to have to be aware of to really evolve into wherever that's going to take us. So I think that's a very, very important thing to have in mind.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you, Diego. And interestingly enough, I think you guys touched all the areas that we're going next. But I think one of the topics that I see becoming very apparent is there's a line from it's a quote that says technology can become almost indistinguishable from magic. I'm butchering the quote, but I think that that's where we're getting to. We're getting to a place where technology and magic just feel like, it's one thing, right? You're talking to a computer, it replies to you right away with an answer automatically, or you can step into a world and all of a sudden, either through your phone or through glasses, like you were saying, or maybe even from your car display, right? So whatever it is, like maybe the glass on the car can be showing you the directions in the future, right? So you're going to this place where you're mixing the realities and everything feels a little bit more like magic. But my last question of the day is more like, so how do we make sure that these futures that we're building, right? How do we, as design leaders, and we as design leaders from Latin America even more, can make this more inclusive? How do we work as a group of people, right, to make it more inclusive? Koji, you touched on it. You said like inclusivity is a very important thing. But I'm wondering, like, in this world of ARs and VRs, and in this world of things scanning your hand to give you soap, or a car scanning you while you're driving down the street, how do we guarantee that it's actually looking at the plethora of races and people that we are, to include us all? Again, circling back, I'm going to go to Diego this time first. So Diego, do you have any thoughts around how can we as leaders help make this new world and future more inclusive?
Absolutely. No, it's a really, really important question, and maybe one that may look apparent, but in reality, maybe it's not as well practiced, and that is the inclusion of proper user experience research into everything that we do. So like inclusivity also really has to do a lot with to what extent and how we as UX practitioners are really the advocates for users. I mean, we can serve as advocates for users, but the users are still need to be still need to be included. They still need to be there. Sometimes they're not. So what can we do to bridge that gap a little bit more closely? Whether it's through the helpful metrics and different kinds of user experience research practices, but it's really just about trying to understand the different people that we might be creating or designing some of these things for. It sounds very textbook, and it sounds almost like very like obviously why wouldn't we do that? But it's surprising to see how many times that doesn't really happen, big companies, small companies, and everything in between. So I think that having a better sense and higher accountability for how we either advocate for the users or how we really include them in the design process for anything that might be especially not as specific, something more global, something more like depending on the product, like how do you understand what this is, not only what problems these are solving, but also like who is this for, and really bringing them into the into the conversation as quickly and early as possible. I think that that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it, I think, is very important, and this perhaps really just goes for anyone who might be seeing or listening to this right now and thinking, I have something special to bring to the kind of work that I do because of who I am and where I'm from. So like different perspectives and different aspects, or basically, having a unique eye into, well, like this might be, X thing might be very easy for this particular group of people, but I know that where I come from, that's not necessarily the case because of X, Y, Z. So trying to kind of be the advocate for some of those opinions for in a certain type of ideas that you might find yourself in. So trying to bring that perspective and which is obviously highlighting the importance of inclusivity when it comes to teams composed of designers, engineers, PMs, etc., and really just kind of highlighting that aspect of it to make everything more inclusive that way.
Oh, this is great. Look, I'm even gonna say this. This is such a good one because I've been doing some mentorship on the side besides doing the regular work, and I focus on mentorship on people of color, people from Latin America, wherever aspect that I can get. And it's so interesting seeing what you said, which is it sounds so simple, right? It sounds so small. It also sounds so simple to talk to someone from Nigeria and then all of a sudden realize that the problem that they're facing is a problem that is like so what that could have been solved, that should have been solved, in the sense of like the problem that they're dealing with is still on transportation. It's still that Google Maps cannot see their world, right? And for us, that has been solved. It's like, oh, we don't care about Google Maps. It's solved. It's done it, right? It does everything for everyone, but maybe not everyone, right? So pulling that thread a little bit is really interesting to me. Koji, would love to hear how you think we can make design more inclusive.
Right. So now it's hard because I'm not thinking about design anymore only, but I'm trying to think about like how do we make I think like the product more inclusive, but also the company more inclusive. And then to me, those things are kind of connected because once you make the company more diverse and more inclusive, then it's almost like an outcome that your product will become more inclusive, because the people who are building your product, because they're more diverse, they're gonna instill more thinking from the beginning about a more diverse pool of people. So, and for me, it's very important because like most of the people in Brazil are either Black or brown. So, and it's complicated because I know like in US, like nobody from Brazil will be considered white, but there is there's the idea there, and the idea in US is quite different. But there we want to make sure that most of our employees are either Black or brown, and likewise we're having like a good balance in gender and sexual orientation and gender identity, so on and so forth. And I think there is two things too, like there's the group of people you have, and then like once you hire those people, you want to make sure that they mix well together. And that's pretty much like when you think about inclusivity and when you think about belonging. So getting the numbers right, it's hard, but it's not so hard, to be honest. At least like in Brazil, I think it's a little bit easier. Maybe just because of my position too, but I'm figuring out ways to hire a very good amount of people with diverse backgrounds. And one of the things that we have in Brazil is that we can have this affirmative job openings, which means that you can open a job in LinkedIn and say, this is affirmative to Black people, this is affirmative to brown people, which is something that you can't do in the US because of the liberal thinking. So, which is interesting, right? Like in Brazil, and that actually was an issue with LinkedIn too, because in Brazil, the law is different. You can actually be more open and say like, for this specific role, I'm looking for a Black person, which makes it not very easy, but easier to hire people in diverse background and less represented ethnies than here in the US. With that said, that's just the beginning, right? Like, because when you hire, let's say you have 54% of your employees are Black, now you have to make sure that people are working well together and they feel like they belong. To me, that's the hardest part, to be honest, because I've been to places where like we've had a very diverse pool of people, and someone from North Carolina and then someone from San Francisco who was like born and raised in San Francisco. Those people, when you put them to work together, they're not necessarily working in like the most peaceful way, I would say, because of all the racial tensions. So in order to make the mix work, you have to do a lot of like belonging, programs, which to me basically is first creating this safe space for people to talk about hard things. For instance, and I think Lyft was a great example of that, and trying to replicate that at Neon, which is when you have something very complicated happening here in the US, like something racist, or when we had all this like protests against racism in the US or against Asian race, we had space at Lyft to talk about it. Basically, all these events where people will come and talk about their experience. Maybe we had like a guest from a specific community who was a writer, and that person, becomes like the instigator to talk about that specific issue. And what is interesting is that it's not much about the resolution of that discussion. It's more about creating the safe space for people to talk. They're not necessarily looking up for an answer. They're not necessarily looking up for, okay, now we figured out how to, solve racism inside the company. It's not about that. It's more about like, let's not ignore that there's a lot of really violent things happening in the US or happening in Brazil. And let's make sure that at the very least, we have a conversation about it, because then we release the tension and we know that, okay, now at least I feel safe to work with this group of people. So this is very hard, and you can only achieve belonging and inclusion if you really have safe space for people to talk about difficult things.
No, I 100% agree, man. The designing the org and the company culture to create that safe space, that psychological safety is such a hard thing, but it's such it's God's work, right? It's like, it's actually making sure that people have a place that they feel like they belong, and that they can share, and they can be heard, right? And they can feel like themselves, right? Bring their full person to the company, right? To their lives, and not have to compartmentalize and separate who they are in their minds and who they are at work, right? And if you really want to get into who they are in your mind and who they are at work, you can watch Severance, which is a great TV show. Anyway, this was the last of my questions. I really appreciate both of you joining. We're going to have one Q&A from Erico, but Diego, thanks again for joining. I always love hearing from you guys. Koji, amazing seeing you again. Congrats on the CDO job and in creating this influence there. Amazing seeing you create this culture too. Hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, and thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to check out the Echoes Design Leadership School. The Echoes Design Leadership program is starting soon, and you shouldn't miss it. Also, thank you for sharing, liking, and subscribing to the channel. Have a good one.